Extraterrestrial Technology Analysts discovered humans improve systems through competition. Part 1. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere with barely a whisper. Inside, senior analyst Halon reviewed his notes one final time, his 6 eyes scanning the data streams that floated before him. The Galactic Technological Concordance had sent him to investigate an anomaly, and Halon took his work seriously. He had spent 300 years analyzing technological development patterns across 47 different species. Earth would be his 48th. Preliminary scans complete, announced his assistant, a methodical named. The methodicals were known throughout the galaxy for their precision and patience. They could spend centuries perfecting a single invention. The humans have developed computing technology, wireless communication networks, and preliminary space travel capabilities. However, the inefficiency levels are beyond anything in our databases. Halon's main eyes narrowed while his auxiliary eyes continued reading reports. Explain. Projected a hologram into the center of the shuttle. It showed Earth's surface covered in thousands of glowing points. Each point represents a separate research facility. Notice how many of them are working on identical problems. Here, for example, are 247 organizations developing similar smartphone devices. Here are 93 companies building electric vehicles. The redundancy is staggering. Perhaps they don't communicate, suggested the junior analyst. She was young, barely 50 years old, and this was her first field assignment. Her species, the synthesists, shared thoughts through a collective consciousness. The idea of withholding information seemed alien to her. "Oh, they communicate," replied. "They have a global information network called the Internet. They can share data instantly across their entire planet, but they choose not to. They guard their research jealously. They create artificial barriers called patents and copyrights. They compete." Halon felt a familiar disappointment settling in his chest. Competition. It was a phase most species went through during their early development. The strong fought the weak. Resources were hoarded. Progress was slow and painful. Most species abandoned competitive models within a few thousand years of developing agriculture, recognizing cooperation as the logical path forward. The concordance itself was built on this principle. 247 species working together, sharing all knowledge freely, advancing as one unified civilization. How much faster could they progress under concordance guidance? Halon asked. Calculations appeared instantly. Conservative estimate suggests a doubling of advancement speed within 50 years. If they fully integrated into our shared research framework, possibly triple their current rate. Then our mission is clear. We observe, we document, and we offer them membership. The sooner we end their competitive phase, the sooner they can join galactic civilization properly. Halon closed the data streams with a gesture. Begin landing procedures. The shuttle touched down in a remote area far from human settlements. The concordants preferred to observe before making contact. They had learned, over millions of years, that premature interference often did more harm than good. Better to understand a species fully before extending the offer of membership. For 3 months, the team studied humanity from a distance. They observed cities where thousands of businesses competed for customers. They watched as humans invented the same solutions over and over, each company refusing to share with the others. They documented the waste, the duplicated effort, the resources spent on marketing and competition instead of research. Halon grew more dismayed with each passing day. The humans had something called a free market economy, where companies fought each other for survival. Those that couldn't compete died. It was brutal and wasteful. In the concordance, resources were allocated based on need and potential benefit to all. No entity ever failed because another entity outcompeted it. They all worked together toward optimal outcomes. "Look at this," said one morning, projecting news from human media. 2 companies, one called Apple and one called, have spent billions of their currency units in legal battles over smartphone technology. Not researching, not developing, just fighting over who invented what first. Imagine if that energy had been directed toward actual progress. Halon shook his head, a gesture he had learned from watching humans. It's worse than I thought. They're not just competing, they're actively sabotaging each other's progress. I'll need to revise my initial report. These humans need concordance intervention urgently. But In, who had been quietly monitoring human internet communications, spoke up hesitantly. Senior analyst, I've noticed something strange in the historical data. Yes, Halon didn't look up from his work. The humans developed flight capability only 120 years ago. Today, they have vehicles that can leave their planet. They went from no computers to artificial intelligence in less than 80 years. Their medical technology has doubled human in just 2 centuries. She paused. Senior analyst, that's faster than any species in concordance records. Halon's primary eyes swiveled to look at her directly. Check your calculations. That can't be correct. I've checked them 17 times. In projected her data. The methodicals took 4,000 years to go from flight to space travel. The took 3,000. Even the rapid ones who are known for quick development took 800 years. The humans did it in 66. Examine the data carefully. The junior analyst is correct. The timeline is accurate. For a long moment, Halon said nothing. His mind raced through possibilities. Perhaps Earth had been visited before. Perhaps the humans had received covert technological assistance. But no, the concordance kept meticulous records of all contact events. Earth had never been approached. There must be an explanation, Halon finally said. Perhaps their biology makes them naturally faster learners, or their planet's environment pressures rapid adaptation. I investigated those possibilities, In said. Human neural processing is actually slower than average compared to concordant species, and their environment, while challenging, is less hostile than many. Then what's causing the accelerated development? Halon demanded. In's next words were soft, almost afraid to speak them. What if it's the competition? Made a sound that was the methodical equivalent of a laugh. Impossible. Competition wastes resources. It creates redundancy. The mathematics are clear. Are they? In pulled up more data. Look at human space exploration. In the mid-20th century, 2 human nations competed to reach their moon. They called it the space race. The competition pushed both nations to work faster, take more risks, invest more resources than either would have alone. They reached the moon in less than a decade. Once the competition ended, their space program slowed dramatically. It took them 50 more years to begin seriously pursuing Mars. Halon studied the data, his discomfort growing. One example doesn't establish a pattern. Then look at their smartphone development. In was gaining confidence now. When one company dominated the market, innovation slowed. But when multiple companies competed, each new model brought significant improvements. The competition forced them to improve faster. And when one company makes a breakthrough, the others have to match it or die. It creates pressure that cooperation doesn't. But at what cost? Halon argued. Yes, they move fast, but they also waste half their efforts on duplication. Imagine if all those companies shared their research. They'd move twice as fast with half the waste. Would they, though? In asked. What if the waste is actually investment? What if having multiple teams trying different approaches means that when one approach fails, others still succeed? Halon wanted to dismiss her theory immediately. It went against everything the concordance had learned over millions of years. Competition was a primitive phase, something to be. Cooperation was the enlightened path. The mathematics proved it. The simulations confirmed it. The concordance's own success demonstrated it. But the data from Earth wouldn't cooperate with his certainty. The humans were advancing faster than they should, significantly faster, and the only variable that seemed to explain it was the one thing Halon had been trained to see as a weakness. I need to file my report to the Concordance Council, Halon said finally. I'll present the facts as we've observed them. The humans are technologically promising but developmentally primitive. They compete instead of cooperate. They waste resources on redundancy. However, I'll note the anomalous development speed and recommend further study before we make first contact. And my theory, in asked. Halon considered for a moment. Include it as a footnote, an interesting observation that requires additional investigation, but don't overstate the case. The concordance has 17 million years of combined experience across hundreds of species. It's unlikely that humans have discovered something we've all missed. Yet even as he said it, Halon felt doubt creeping in. He had been trained to follow evidence wherever it led. And the evidence, however improbable, suggested that these strange, competitive, inefficient humans were onto something. Something that might change everything the concordance thought it knew about progress. Part 2. In couldn't sleep. Her species didn't technically need sleep in the way humans did, but they entered rest cycles where their consciousness dimmed and their thoughts settled. Tonight, her thoughts refused to settle at all. She kept returning to the data about human competition, seeing patterns that her senior colleagues dismissed. 3 weeks had passed since Halon filed his report. The Concordance Council had responded with polite acknowledgement and instructions to continue monitoring, but it wanted to do more than monitor from a distance. She wanted to understand. "I'm going into the city," she announced the next morning. Looked up from his calculations. "That's not protocol. We observe from distance until first contact is authorized." Senior analyst Halon went into the city yesterday, and pointed out. "I saw him return with something called coffee." "I went in disguise for basic reconnaissance," Halon said, though his tone suggested he knew he'd been caught bending his own rules. "It was necessary for the mission." "Then my reconnaissance is also necessary." In had already configured her holographic disguise, making her appear human. "I'll be careful. I just want to observe them more closely." Halon sighed, a very human gesture he'd unconsciously adopted. 6 hours. Stay in public spaces. Don't engage in detailed conversations. Report back before sunset. It materialized her disguise and left the shuttle. The nearest human city was a 40-minute walk away, and she used the time to study human behavior through the data streams. Humans walked with purpose, their faces often focused on small, rectangular devices. They seemed to live partially in the physical world and partially in their digital one. The city itself was chaos. Everywhere and looked, she saw competition. Restaurants lined the streets, each offering similar food but claiming theirs was better. Stores sold identical products at different prices. Even street performers competed for the attention and money of. She spent an hour simply walking and observing before she noticed a pattern. The restaurants that served the best food had lines of waiting customers. The stores with the best prices were crowded. The most talented street performer had the largest audience. Competition, it seemed, created a natural selection process. The best survived and thrived. The worst either improved or disappeared. In a concordant city, resources would be allocated by a central planning committee. Each district would have exactly the number of restaurants needed, serving optimal nutrition at calculated intervals. There would be no lines because supply would match demand perfectly. There would be no waste. But there would also be no excellence, in realized. No restaurant would need to be the best because there was no consequence for being mediocre. No store would need to offer the lowest prices because customers had no alternatives. The system was efficient, but it was also static. She found herself drawn to a building with a sign reading Public Library. Inside, humans of all ages sat reading, studying, and working on computers. It was free, a public service, yet even herein saw competition. Students competed for grades. Authors competed for readers. Even the books on the shelves competed for attention, their covers designed to catch the eye. "First time here?" a voice asked. An elderly human woman smiled it in. You look a bit lost. In almost activated her translation protocols before remembering her disguise included language capability. Yes, I'm new to the area. I'm trying to understand how your society works. The woman laughed. Good luck with that. I've lived here 70 years and I'm still figuring it out. But the library's a good start. Information is free here, unlike most places. Why do some places charge for information while others provide it freely? In asked. Well, that's the balance, isn't it? Capitalism and community, competition and cooperation. We need both. The woman gestured around the library. This exists because we decided some things are too important to leave to the market, but most of our economy runs on competition because that's what drives improvement. But competition is wasteful, In said, repeating what she'd been taught. It duplicates effort. The woman tilted her head thoughtfully. Maybe, but it also means if one company fails, another succeeds. If one approach doesn't work, someone else is trying something different. Take medicine. Right now, dozens of companies are researching cancer treatments. Some will fail. That seems wasteful, right? But the ones that succeed will save millions of lives. And because they're competing, they're all working faster, trying harder, taking risks they wouldn't take if they were cooperating. In thought about this, what if they all shared their research? They could eliminate the failures faster and focus resources on what works. Sure, but who decides what works? What if the approach everyone agrees on is wrong? What if the solution comes from the one team everyone else thinks is crazy? The woman smiled. Competition means lots of people get to try lots of crazy ideas. Most fail, but the ones that succeed change the world. After the woman left, In sat in the library for hours, accessing human internet and reading about their history. She read about the space race between America and the Soviet Union, about how competition between two nations accomplished what might have taken centuries through cooperation. She read about the Industrial Revolution, where competing inventors and entrepreneurs created machines that transformed human civilization. She read about the current artificial intelligence boom, where dozens of companies race to build smarter systems, each breakthrough pushing the others to achieve more. She also read about the failures, companies that went bankrupt, research projects that ended in nothing, resources invested in dead ends. The waste was real and significant. But then she noticed something else. The failures weren't really waste. When a company failed, its employees joined other companies, bringing their knowledge with them. When a research project ended, the data was often published, helping others avoid the same mistakes. Even bankruptcy served a purpose, freeing up resources to be used by more successful ventures. The system recycled its failures, learning from them. In return to the shuttle after dark, her mind buzzing with ideas, she found Halon waiting, looking annoyed. 6 hours, you said. It's been 11. I'm sorry, senior analyst, but I had to understand. I spent the day observing human competitive systems in person. In pulled up her notes. I think we've been analyzing this wrong. We've been measuring competition against cooperation as if they're opposites, but humans don't see it that way. They use both. They cooperate within companies but compete between companies. They cooperate within nations but compete between nations. They've built a system that harnesses both. And, Halon asked, though his tone suggested interest despite his irritation. And I think we need to run an experiment. I want permission to conduct deep analysis of specific human industries, track their development over time, measure the actual impact of competition versus the theoretical impact of cooperation, get real data instead of assumptions. Spoke up from his workstation. That would require months of observation. The council expects our final report in 6 weeks. Then request an extension, In said. Tell them we've discovered a potential paradigm shift in technological development theory. Tell them this could change how the Concordance approaches innovation. Halon's 6 eyes all focused on her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. You've caught me, junior analyst. I've been doing unauthorized research of my own, The numbers don't lie. Human advancement is anomalous. If competition is the cause, we need to understand why and how. He pulled up his own data. I've been analyzing the concordance's own history. Our rate of innovation has been declining for the past 3,000 years. We still advance, but more slowly. I always assumed this was natural. We've solved most of the easy problems, so the remaining challenges are harder. But what if that's wrong? What if we've become too efficient, too optimized? What if we've eliminated the pressure that drives breakthrough innovation? You think we need competition? Asked, sounding scandalized. I don't know, Halon admitted. But I think these humans might be teaching us something important, something we forgot or never knew, and we owe it to the concordance to find out what that is. Over the following weeks, the team dove deep into human systems. They analyzed the pharmaceutical industry and watched companies race to develop new drugs. They studied the technology sector and saw how competition drove rapid iteration and improvement. They examined the automotive industry's shift to electric vehicles, noting how competition accelerated the transition in ways that central planning never could. They also studied the failures of competition. They saw how it could lead to inequality, with winners taking most of the rewards. They saw how it could prioritize short-term profits over long-term sustainability. They saw the human suffering that occurred when people lost their jobs to more competitive rivals. But they also saw something the concordance had long forgotten, the fire of necessity. When humans competed, they pushed themselves beyond comfortable limits. They took risks. They innovated desperately. They achieved things that careful, cooperative planning would never attempt. And compiled everything into a comprehensive report. She didn't just present data. She presented a theory. Competition, she argued, was a form of distributed problem-solving. Instead of one team trying to find the best solution, dozens of teams tried different solutions simultaneously. The redundancy wasn't waste. It was investment in diversity of approach. And that diversity meant that breakthrough innovations came from unexpected places. She also noted the human balance. They competed, yes, but they also maintained cooperative structures. They had governments to prevent competition from becoming destructive. They had universities that shared research freely. They had open-source software movements where thousands of programmers cooperated. Humans had learned to use competition as a tool, not a way of life. The question, concluded in her report, is whether the concordance can learn from humans without becoming human. Can we introduce competitive elements while maintaining our cooperative foundation? Can we harness the fire of competition without being consumed by it? Halon read the report 3 times. Then he added his own endorsement and sent it to the Concordance Council with a priority flag. The response came faster than expected. The council wanted the team to return home immediately for a full presentation, but they had one more request: bring a human with them. The council wanted to hear directly from the species that had apparently mastered what the concordance had abandoned ago. The question was, which human, and would any human even agree to come? Part 3. Dr. Sarah was having the worst day of her career. The fusion reactor prototype she'd spent 5 years developing had just failed spectacularly. Not dangerously, thank goodness, but thoroughly. Completely. The board of directors at Stellar Dynamics had gathered that morning to review funding, and she'd had to tell them their $100 million investment had produced nothing but expensive scrap metal. She sat alone in her office, staring at the equations on her whiteboard, trying to figure out where she'd gone wrong. Someone knocked on the door. "Go away," she called out. "Unless you're here to fire me, in which case, just slide the paperwork under the door." The door opened anyway. 3 people she'd never seen before entered her office. Something about them seemed off, though she couldn't quite identify what. They moved too smoothly. Their eyes were too alert. And was it just her imagination, or did the tall one have a weird shimmer around the edges? "Doctor," the tall one said, "my name is Halon. I represent the Galactic Technological Concordance. We've been observing your species for several months, and we have a proposition for you. Sarah stared at them. Then she laughed, tired and bitter. Great, aliens, of course, why not? Today can't get any worse. We're quite real, the shorter woman said. She had an earnest quality that reminded Sarah of her graduate students. I'm in. We need your help understanding something about human culture. Specifically, we need to understand competition. You want to understand competition? Sarah gestured at her whiteboard. Talk to Fusion Technologies. They just beat us to a working prototype. Their reactor went online yesterday while mine became a very expensive paperweight. That's competition. They win, I lose. Humanity gets working fusion power 20 years earlier than expected. Hooray for market forces. The third alien, who introduced himself as, tilted his head. You don't sound pleased that humanity has achieved fusion power. Of course I'm pleased, Sarah snapped. I'm also devastated that it wasn't my team that did it. I'm also furious at myself for going down a dead end while technologies found the right path. I'm also terrified about what happens to my team now that we've failed. But mostly, I'm just tired. Halon and in exchanged glances. Doctor, Halon said carefully, would you be willing to come with us to address the Galactic Concordance Council? We want you to explain how human competition drives innovation. Sure, Sarah said. Why not? I've got nothing better to do. I'll probably be unemployed next week anyway. The journey to the Concordance Council chambers took 2 days, though they crossed distances that would have taken human spacecraft thousands of years. Sarah spent most of the trip arguing within about whether her failure was truly a failure. Your research will contribute to the field, In insisted. Others will learn from your mistakes. That's not how it works, Sarah replied. Technologies will patent their design. My research will be buried in archives because no one wants to study failures. The only thing my work contributes is a cautionary tale about what not to do. But surely you'll share your data with other researchers. Why would I? If I do, I'm giving away 5 years of work for free. Maybe some university will publish my failures as a paper someday, but right now, that data is all my company has left. We have to protect it. In looked distressed. But that's so inefficient. If everyone shared all their research, both successful and failed, the entire field would advance faster. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But then no one would take risks. Why invest millions in risky research if you have to share the results freely? Technologies gambled that their approach would work. They invested money, time, and effort. Now they get to profit from that gamble. That's fair. When they arrived at the Concordance Council chambers, Sarah was shocked into silence. The room was enormous, with representatives from hundreds of alien species arranged in concentric circles. The architecture was beautiful, organic, grown rather than built. It looked like cooperation made manifest. Halon presented their findings to the council. He showed the data on human advancement. He explained IN's theory about competition as distributed problem-solving. He demonstrated how human innovation rates exceeded concordance projections by significant margins. Then IN spoke, presenting her deeper analysis. She had studied not just human technology but human culture. She showed how competition existed in human arts, sports, politics, and philosophy. She argued that competition was fundamental to how humans pushed boundaries and explored possibilities. Finally, they called Sarah forward to address the council. She stood before hundreds of alien species and felt absurdly out of place. She was still wearing the casual clothes she'd had on in her office. She hadn't prepared a speech. She was a failed engineer, not a diplomat. I understand you want to know about competition, she began. Honestly, I hate it. I hate failing. I hate losing funding. I hate watching rivals succeed where I failed. Competition is stressful, brutal, and often unfair. She could see Halon wincing, probably worried she was undermining their whole argument. But here's the thing, Sarah continued. Competition is also why I got out of bed this morning. It's why I've spent the last 5 years working 70-hour weeks. It's why I took risks that a more cautious approach would never allow. I wanted to be the one who cracked fusion power. I wanted my name in the history books. I wanted to win. She pulled up images of her failed reactor on the holographic display. This is my failure. It's spectacular. I spent $100 million proving that this design doesn't work. In your system, that would be pure waste. In our system, it's information. Now technologies knows not to go down this path. Now other teams can rule out my approach and focus elsewhere. My failure narrows the search space. A methodical counselor spoke up. But wouldn't it have been more efficient if you and technologies had cooperated from the start? Maybe, Sarah said, but maybe not. Technologies took a risky approach that most experts thought wouldn't work. If we'd been cooperating, the group consensus probably would have gone with my more conservative design. We might have spent 20 years perfecting an approach that ultimately hits the same wall mine did. Instead, technologies took their risky shot, I took my conservative shot, and 3 other companies took 3 other shots. 5 different approaches, explored simultaneously. Paid off. The others didn't, but we found the answer in 5 years instead of 50. Another counselor, a synthesist, asked, "Doesn't your system create unnecessary suffering? Your team will lose their jobs. Your investors will lose money." Yes, Sarah admitted. And that sucks. Competition has real costs. People get hurt. But those costs create pressure. If I knew I'd be fine no matter what, would I have pushed as hard? Would I have tried such an ambitious design? I don't think so. The fear of failure drove me to attempt something great. I failed, but I tried. She paused, looking around at the assembled aliens. Look, I'm not saying competition is better than cooperation. I'm saying they're different tools for different problems. When you have a clear goal and a known path, cooperation is probably more efficient. Get everyone aligned, eliminate redundancy, march forward together. But when you don't know the answer, when you're exploring unknown territory, that's when competition shines. Let 100 teams try 100 approaches. Most will fail. But the ones that succeed will succeed in ways that no committee would ever have approved. A long silence followed. Then an elderly alien near the center of the council chamber stood. Sarah's translator identified her as Grand Counselor, this, leader of the entire concordance. "Doctor," the Grand Counselor said, "your species fascinates us. You've achieved in centuries what has taken other species. We invited you here thinking you would teach us the secret of competition. But I think the real secret is simpler than that. You're willing to fail." The Grand Counselor gestured at the assembled council. "We've built a civilization on eliminating failure. We plan carefully. We allocate resources optimally. We make decisions collectively to ensure the best possible outcomes. And it works. We succeed far more often than we fail, but we've also become cautious. We avoid risks. We don't attempt things unless we're confident of success." She turned to address the full council. The humans don't have that luxury. Their competitive system means failure is common, so they've learned to embrace it. They fail fast, learn from failures, and try again. They take risks we would never contemplate, and sometimes those risks pay off spectacularly. Debate erupted across the council chamber. Some species argued that competition would tear apart the concordance's unity. Others suggested limited experiments with competitive structures. The methodicals wanted to run simulations first. The synthesists worried about damage to their collective consciousness. Sarah watched, overwhelmed. She'd come expecting to give a brief talk and go home. Instead, she seemed to have sparked a galaxy-wide philosophical crisis. Eventually, Grand Counselor, this called for order. "We will not abandon cooperation. That would be foolish, but perhaps we've become too optimized. Perhaps we need to reintroduce controlled competition into our systems, not for all research but for our most challenging problems. Let teams compete. Let approaches clash. Let the best ideas win." She looked at Sarah. "Doctor, the Concordance would like to offer you a position as innovation consultant. We need humans to teach us how to fail productively. We need you to help us remember how to take risks." Sarah thought about her failed reactor, her uncertain job prospects, the stress of competition. Then she thought about the thrill of pursuing an impossible dream, the satisfaction of pushing boundaries even if you didn't succeed, the fire that competition lit inside her. "I'll do it," she said. "But on one condition: you don't just learn from our successes, you learn from our failures too. You study the companies that went bankrupt, the scientists who were wrong, the projects that collapsed, because that's where the real lessons are. In the wreckage, we learn what doesn't work so we can find what does." The Grand Counselor smiled, a gesture she'd learned from humans. "Agreed. Welcome to the Concordance, Doctor." 6 months later, Sarah stood in a Concordance research facility and watched two teams compete to solve a faster-than-light communication problem. One team was taking a conservative approach based on established physics. The other was pursuing a wild theory that most experts thought was impossible. The conservative team was making steady progress. The wild team had failed 3 times already, but they kept trying, adjusting, learning from each failure. And the conservative team, knowing they had competition, was working harder than they would have otherwise. Sarah didn't know which team would succeed. Maybe both would fail and a third approach would eventually work. But for the first time the Concordance was exploring the unknown with the urgency and passion that competition created. Joined Sarah at the observation window. "Was I right?" the young analyst asked. "Is competition humanity's secret?" Sarah shook her head. "Competition isn't the secret, it's just a tool. The real secret is simpler. Humans try things, we fail a lot, we try again. We don't wait for perfect conditions or optimal circumstances, we just try." She smiled, watching the two teams work through the night, each pushing the other to excel. "But yeah, competition helps. It makes us try harder, reach further, risk more. It's not always pretty, it's not always fair, but it works." In the years that followed, the Concordance slowly integrated competitive elements into their research frameworks. Not everywhere, not for everything, but for their most challenging problems, they learned to let teams compete. They learned to celebrate instructive failures alongside successes. They learned to embrace risk. And as they did, their rate of innovation began to climb again. Not because competition was inherently superior to cooperation, but because they'd learned to use both. The right tool for the right problem. Working together when the path was clear. Competing when the path was unknown. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't technology or knowledge. It was permission to fail, permission to compete, permission to try impossible things and fall on your face and get up and try again. Sarah's fusion reactor still sat in storage, a monument to expensive failure, but technologies had offered her a job leading their next big project. Because in humanity's competitive system, today's failure could become tomorrow's success. You just had to be willing to try.